Hi, welcome back to the Custom Saber Shop on YouTube. My name is Rob, and today I'm going to show you how to build this. A basic lightsaber. Now this is made with MHS parts. It's powered by 4 AAA batteries. Very durable. You can fight with this. It is a great introductory build, a starter build. If you're new to sabersmithing, this would be a great thing to attempt as a first try. It can be upgraded with sound and all those things later. I used for this build a 4 AAA battery holder. You could basically do the same type of build with a V6 holder from the Custom Saber Shop and the 18650 style rechargeable lithium-ion battery instead of the 4 AAAs. And if you want to watch a video showing basically how to configure that battery holder and then use it for this, just click here and I'll put a link to that part of the video, a previous video where I showed how to do that. But for this saber, we're going to use the 4 AAA battery holder. And part of the reason is because 4 AAAs gives us 6 volts. And in order to use some of the higher power LEDs like the Rebel, you're going to need pretty much almost 4 volts in order to run them. So 6 volts with a resistor gives us the voltage that we need for the LED. So I'll break all that down, and of course, as always, all the parts are in the description of this video, so you just need to scroll down, take a look at the description of the video, and that'll itemize all the parts that were used in this build. For today, you're going to need a soldering iron. You can try to attempt this with the modular wiring system from the Custom Saber Shop, which utilizes clips, but there's a lot of figuring out what clips go with what. It's probably simpler just to learn how to solder and try to do it this way. So you're going to need a soldering iron. Even a basic soldering gun will work for this because we're not working with any soundboards where it would be important to have an electrostatic safe soldering iron. Not necessary on this build. Even a basic soldering gun will work, or a basic soldering iron. As always, you're going to need some eye protection when you're soldering so you don't get solder in your eyes. This stuff is going to be great. It's shrink tube, heat shrink tube. This is the 1/8 inch from the Custom Saber Shop. A link to that in the description as well. You may need a little hobby vise or some clamps to hold your parts. These things are awesome, helping hands. They're really cheap. You can get them on Amazon or at Radio Shack for holding your wires while you're soldering. You're going to need wire snips, needle nose pliers, maybe scissors, maybe some kind of craft knife like this. And for this build, I use craft foam. I'll explain why a little bit later. It's really cheap, really easy to get, and works well for a build like this. So I think we're ready. Let's get started. First thing you're going to want to do is lay out your parts, so you have everything you need for your saber. You've got your body parts and the internals, your heat shrink ready to go. You'll notice with the battery case, yours will probably come with a JST connector on the end, but we're going to snip that off because we're going to do this build with soldering, so it'll look more like that. We'll get to that later. But the first thing you want to do is prep your parts. Now, with this one, you've got your Rebel LED, and I've already mounted it onto the heatsink with the thermal pad. Now, normally I would solder onto this before attaching it to the heatsink, but I'm using this from a different build. So we're just going to crank up the heat on the soldering iron, and we're gonna use that the way it is. So to prep your parts, you've got some of the parts that actually go together. First, you've got your optics holder and your optic. Those will snap together, and you'll see that they'll really nicely sit on top of the Rebel LED there. You have got your pommel and your insert. Now this is an insert that's got vents for sound holes for a speaker. You can of course use the solid MPS insert like that doesn't have sound holes. It's a matter of preference, and if you're planning to upgrade to sound later, you might as well get one that's got some sound holes. The way to attach that is it just drops in, and then you use your needle nose pliers, and you very carefully, I'll do it so you can see it, very carefully grip onto that. Now you've got that. You can drop it in, squeeze it tight, and when it's sitting in there, you release it, and now you've got a nice solid pommel with an insert. And that, we'll place that aside. That's ready to go. I guess this is going to go this way. So I always like to pre-assemble. So I just take my parts and I just assemble them together just to see if what I had planned and designed on the MHS builder is actually going to go together the way I expect. So I've got my blade holder, I've got my switch hole, I've got my switch, Now, I'm going to point out too, this is a latching switch. You'll hear it click. That means it engages, stays engaged until I disengage it. The momentary switches, whoops, look very similar, but they don't click. So if you've got a few of these sitting around in a drawer and you just want to make sure, the momentary switches are the ones that won't click. The latching switch is what we're using today will click. This is one from a previous build, so it's a little bit beat up, but it will serve the purpose. And I think our parts are prepped and ready to go, so we're going to do this in stages. So we're going to start with the LED and optic and all that stuff. So we're going to wire up the LED. Now I've cut some wires using blue and white, because if you're using the modular wiring system, the LEDs are wired with blue on the negative and white on the positive. Just for simplicity's sake, that's what we're going to do. Now normally I would wire the resistor. Now this is a 2.7 ohm 3 watt resistor. The one that the Custom Saber Shop sells is a 10 watt resistor. Will look almost identical to this. 10 watt just means it can handle more heat. It's not really necessary in this type of build. Either way it'll work. This is just one I had on hand. Normally I would wire that in really close to the LED, but for the sake of this build we're actually going to wire it closer to the battery holder. So we're going to set that resistor aside and do that later, and we'll bring the camera in close and I'll show you quickly how I'm going to solder the LED. So I've got my LED here, and I've got my wires, and I've got my soldering iron heated up, and I've got my my helping hands, which I'll be using. Now normally I would use a little hobby vise or something like this to mount the LED on, so that I could keep it solid while I'm attaching wires. But if it's attached to the heatsink already, it's nice and heavy, it's going to keep it in one place, so that's a nice thing. So I'm going to take my wire snips here and I'm going to snip off, just over maybe a 1/16 of an inch. You really don't need much wire showing, and I'm going to twist it so it's nice and clean, and then I'm going to do the same thing to the white wire. Now I cut my wires about 11 inches long for this Saber build. I want to measure them to go through the body and have lots left over. So 11-12 inches. Actually the white wire is about an inch or two longer. It's about 12 or 13 inches, because the white wire is what we're going to build everything onto. So the white or the positive wire is a little bit longer in this case. You always want to err on the side of making your wires a little too long. You don't want to waste wire, but you don't want to run out either. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a look and I'm going to see, oh, there's the positive mark right there on the LED, and I'm going to run my wire so that it just drops. It's planning to drop into that hole. So I'm going to put it in my hobby vise, and I'm going to solder that wire on right about there. Now what I'm going to do before I solder it on is I'm going to do what's called pre-tinning, and this is just a really good practice, where I take my hot soldering iron and a little bit of solder and I just tin that wire, and now they're going to be easier to adhere. I'm going to place it. Oops, can't really see. So I've placed it right there. I'll take my soldering iron, I'm going to touch it to both and then add a little bit of solder while I'm doing it. Oops. Now because I'm soldering right onto a heatsink, it takes a little bit more heat to generate a good joint. So it is a little tricky. But I get a good, nice, shiny joint. I don't want to move it while it's cooling. I want to check it and make sure it's good and solid and that there's no blobs of solder extending onto anything else. I also want to make sure when I'm soldering that I'm not laying my soldering iron across the emitter of the LED and melting that plastic emitter. I want to make sure I only touch what I want to touch with the soldering iron. So that's this one. I'm going to attach the blue one next, and then we'll move on from there. So my white wire is attached to positive, my blue wire is attached to the negative, and now all I do is I basically run the wire through that hole. So there's my my LED soldered up, my nice long wires. I can now place my optic and optic holder on. I want to make sure that the optic holder fits right where it's supposed to. So you'll see it once you get it to drop into that little hole. Then it's gonna work for you just perfectly. And sometimes when you get it to drop in, you can feel it. It just locks in. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to place my finger through that part, and I'm going to keep the pressure on this optic holder so it doesn't flop off. And I'm going to continue, just thread this together. I'm keeping pressure on the optic from the inside so that it keeps its spacing on the Rebel. And there we go. Now I have a nice, firm, tight optic holder. It's all wired up and ready to go. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to mount my switch on this white wire, because in terms of the circuit, the switch is going to interrupt our white wire because the electricity is going to come from the battery pack. The red wire will connect with the white wire, will be interrupted by the switch, go through across the LED, out the blue wire, and the blue wire is going to connect to our black wire. So that's going to be our basic circuit. So I've snipped the white wire. I want to give myself, because I'm going to have to run this through the hole, I want to give myself a couple inches to work with. This is why the white wire needs to be longer than the blue wire. So I've taken about 2.5, 3 inches, and I've snipped that. I'm going to run this up through my hole, but before I do, I never want to forget, I'm going to need to have the switch hardware on my wire, because it would make no sense to have the wire run through and attach to the switch and then have these sitting on the table and have forgotten to put those in place. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to put the nut over the white wire first. Then I'm going to put the washer over the white wire next. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to run the blue wire through the body of the Saber. I don't need to go through the switch hole, just need to get it through the body of the Saber. Pull it out the other end. And without losing my hardware, keeping it on my wire, I'm going to run now the white wire, feed it up through the hole. I'm going to slide this in place. I want my blue wire out of the way, obviously. And because I want this tucked in here, and I don't want to attach my blade holder just yet, I just want to have lots of room to work with. And as you can see, I've snipped off about 1/8 of an inch there to work with. You can use a pair of pliers or something to kind of keep your part steady while you're working if you want. And what I'm going to do now that I've got my hardware in place is I'm going to solder these 2 wires onto my switch. Also, you're going to use a little bit of heat shrink. Probably, let's see, I've labeled this. This is a 1/16 heat shrink. I'm going to just test measure it. You know, that might actually be, no, that's pretty good. So I'm going to snip off about 1/4 of an inch lengths, 2 of them. Put my heat shrink on before I solder. And it's basically the same thing that I showed you before. Pre-tin the wire. Pre-tinning is great because it doesn't, the wires don't fray. As you can see, I've got both wires attached. I can take my trusty heat gun. You can also do this with a blow dryer, or even be careful with a lighter. You don't want to blow heat on your fingers because it's quite, it's hot. And as you can see, that heat shrink starts to shrink up. Oops, now it's good to go. Now I'm able to gently pull my LED through. I want to run this white wire back through the hole, and my switch hardware is right where I left it. I'm actually going to need to run the second white wire back through these as well, so that when I pull it tight, I start to drop my switch in. I've got the washer that I can, don't know if you'll be able to see it, I'm going to run the washer over the switch there, and now I'm going to run, now you could actually pull the blue wire right out of the way if you want, just to give you lots of room to work with. And I don't know if you can see it. Try to do it with needle nose pliers so that you can see what I'm doing a little bit better. I can just drop the nut over there, and now I can pop the switch up through the hole all the way. You'll see that it goes there. And then basically with my finger, I'm dropping the washer in, and I'm just going to get that nut seated. Now sometimes this takes a little while, and you need to be patient with yourself, especially since you've got this heavy LED flopping there. You don't want to put too much tension on your wires, so just take your time. And I'm going to take my time, and I'm going to get that threaded, and then I'll show you what it looks like when I'm done. Okay, it took me about 5 minutes, but I finally got. Okay, it took me about 5 minutes, but I finally got the seat nut threaded, and of course if I want to tighten it up I can just put my finger on there and I can just turn this a bit. I don't want to turn it too much and twist my wires, but just to get it nice and tight in there. My switch is ready to go. So now at this point I want to feed my remaining white wire back through here all the way to the end. Okay, my module drops in there. It's nice and tight. I can feel that there's no wires being pinched. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to attach the blade holder. I start threading the blade holder on. And if I want, I can keep watch that it's not twisting my wires too much while I'm doing that. This one's really good. Nice and tight fit. There we go, and we're ready to move on. Now we're ready to start attaching the battery holder and get that ready. But before we do, there's a couple of things I like to do. Now this is a bit of fluorescent tube protector. It comes in 4-foot lengths, and this is for T8 fluorescent tubes. You may see something like this soon at the custom Saber shop. Currently it's not in store, but this fits really nicely inside the MHS parts. And I've cut this to size so it will butt up against that switch, and it'll provide some protection between the batteries and the aluminum body. I always like to do extra things to protect against short circuits, so I'm going to slide that in now. And I'm also going to be mindful of where my battery holder is going to sit and how to get it out. So if it's going to sit around here, then my pommel is going to go on the end. I don't want it sliding all the way down. I guess the wires are going to go this way. I don't want it sliding all the way down, sliding around inside my Saber. So I want something to kind of stop it from sliding too far in. So what I'm going to do, and there's lots of different ways of doing this, is I'm going to use this just cheap basic craft foam. And I've measured around the inside of the Saber, and it's about 3 1/4 inches. We're going to do 3 1/2. And I'm also just going to eyeball it like this. I'm not going to measure very precisely. I want just to slide into about there, and I want my craft foam to go from about here to my switch. So I'm going to cut a length of craft foam that's about that wide, and I'm going to cut it about 3 1/2 inches long. And now what I do with this is I roll this up. And I just do the same thing. I can slide my wires through here. See, they don't match up. That doesn't matter. That's just going to keep my battery holder from sliding in too far. So anyways, those things can now sit inside the Saber. And now I am free to start wiring this. And I don't want to wire my battery holder at the end of these long wires and have a whole bunch of wire to coil up when I stuff it into the Saber. I want about 3 inches. So when I pull my battery holder all the way out of my Saber, I want it to be about 3 inches away from the edge here. And so I've got almost the full 3 inches on these wires here. Actually, I do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut these ones fairly close, about 1 inch. You know, and if you make lots of mistakes with wires, you want to maybe give yourself a little bit more. And then I'm going to want to strip the ends here, twist. And here's what we're going to do next. It's time to attach our resistor. We're going to attach it on the white wire side of the circuit too. And remember what I said, red, positive, is going to go to white. So I'm going to snip this guy here, and I'm going to attach that right there. But before I do, you guessed it, some heat shrink. I'll put that on first. Get my helping hands. And I can clamp right over that heat shrink. Just helps protect the wire a little bit. Line that up. Now in this case, I'm not going to pre-tin, just to show you that you don't have to. It is a good practice, and if in the process of me attaching these wires I'd happen to get one to fray, then I'd have a little tiny wire sticking out, which would be less than ideal. Okay, so I've got my my resistor soldered on the red, and of course my red's going to go to the white there. So what I want to do is I want to measure my wires and figure out where I want to cut them. So my white wire is going to go right about here onto the resistor, and my blue wire is going to go all the way over here to that black wire. So I want to cut them so that one wire of my circuit isn't a whole lot longer than the other wire of the circuit. So now those are going to match up nicely. And I want to cut my resistor lead, remove all this. Now I can strip these two wires about 1/8 of an inch down and get them prepped and ready to solder. That looks like a good joint. Here's a little trick that I like to do sometimes, is if I want this heat shrink to stay in place before I'm ready to hit it with my heat gun, because I haven't done the blue wire yet, you can move it in place. And if you've got good heat shrink like the Custom Saber Shop sells, you can just rub it gently with the dry part of your soldering iron and it'll start to shrink up just enough that it'll hold in place where you want it. It's not going to slide back down the wire and into the Saber body while you're trying to work, which can be frustrating. I'll do the same thing with this, because when you're putting heat shrink over a piece of wire, it could slip around and you could actually start hitting it with a heat gun and it's much closer to the joint than you want. So I can put it right where I want. I can hit it with the soldering iron just so it stays where I want it. I'll show you another trick too. While the heat gun is heating the shrink, the wires get warmed up. And while the wires are warmed up, they're really pliable, and it's a great time to twist up some of your wires. Not a whole lot. You don't want to really twist your wires. But what it does is it just kind of makes them more like one wire. So twist them like that, put something heavy over it, and let it cool. And those wires are twisted together, a little bit ready to go. And I'm going to grab some batteries because we are ready to test this bad boy. Before I put the batteries in and test it, I want to show you one more thing. It's a really neat little trick. When the battery holder slides in, it might be a little bit tight. So I'm going to take one of these lines I snipped off of the battery pack. I think this is 26 gauge wire. And as you can see, I've tied a knot in one end. I've made it as tight as possible. Make it a small, small knot. I'm going to snip off that. And then what I'm going to do is there's these little holes in the back of the battery holder. I'm going to run the wire through one of these holes. And if I pull that tight, it's actually going to nestle in beside the spring. And I'll show you why this is important. You want to make sure that you're careful doing this so that when the battery goes in, it doesn't interfere with the battery spring and its operation. So the battery sits in there properly. But then when you've got this nice little wire that once the battery holder is inside, you can actually tug on the wire and pull the battery holder out rather than bang it against your table to try to get it out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut that, and you can put another knot in the end if you want. You can make this really nice and short if you want. Anyways, you can put a little piece of heat shrink on the end there, and anyways, that'll help you pull your batteries out. So we're just going to put some batteries in here. I still keep putting batteries in backwards. Now comes the moment of truth. Batteries are in, switch is in. I'm going to hit the switch and the blade better come on. And it does. So now we basically finish up assembling the Saber. Now I've twisted my wires, and you'll remember there's that foam in there. So that's actually going to keep that resistor. Because normally when I put a resistor in line, like heavy resistor in line like that, you don't want it banging around inside your Saber while you're fighting. So I would, also you want it to be air cooled. So I would wrap some bushings around the wire, something rubber that will keep this thing from moving a lot. But because I've got that foam in there where the resistor is going to sit, that's actually going to do the job for me. So when this is in here, you don't hear a resistor banging around on the inside of your Saber. I'm going to press that in, and as you can see, the foam keeps it from going too far in. Do something like about that. Place that on my pommel, and that's going to keep. Now that red wire may still want to stick out because I cut it longer than I needed to. But that's going to keep everything from sliding around too much in there. Now I'm going to put a blade retention screw in so that my blade doesn't fly out. Mine are 832 thread. You can of course order those from the Custom Saber shop in your blade holder. Blade goes in, blade retention screw, tightens it up, and I have got a stunt saber without sound, ready to go. Goes on, goes off. When it comes time to change the batteries, it's nice and simple to do because I've got my little red wire there. Pulls up my battery holder, and there are my batteries. So there it is. That's how to build a basic lightsaber with parts from the Custom Saber shop. Of course, you can mix and match MHS parts and make the hilt a little bit more how you like. I haven't totaled up the parts on this saber, but I'm pretty sure this is going to be well under $100 to build a basic, duelable saber. So thanks for watching.